Hey, what's going on, guys? So I'm really excited for this episode with a special guest that is going to address something that's really coming at e-commerce and getting the best performance out of your e-commerce business from a totally different angle, but a much more powerful angle than a strategy or a tactic. And what I'm talking about is your mindset and using intuition. I can tell you from my 8+ years of running my business and multiple businesses now that intuition's huge. And when I've followed my intuition and I've been able to recognize that, I've seen massive yields with my actions where I've been able to 10x my business several times by really following my intuition. So this is going to be a very powerful episode for you with a special guest, Sunil Godse. Let's dive into the episode. I know you're going to love it. Are you ready to transform your normal e-commerce business into one that experiences exponential growth year after year using online advertising? If so, this show is for you. Me and my guests will show you how you too can grow your e-commerce business to 7 or even 8 figures so you can go on more luxurious vacations, spoil yourself and your family, say yes to more opportunities, and become financially free so you never have to worry about money again. Welcome to the E-commerce Performance Marketing Show. Hey, how's it going, guys? Josh Murphy here, host of the E-com Performance Marketing Show. I have another incredible guest for you, and this one is really going to be someone that can really 10x your game as an e-com business owner. That's why I decided to bring him on board, just because he's going to be addressing something that's super rare that is really going to help you on a whole nother plane versus just e-com strategies and tactics. Let me introduce you to Sunil Godse. So after making a series of bad decisions, with one leading to a friend being shot and killed, he spent thousands of hours on research and interviews to stop people from wasting time making bad decisions by sharpening their intuition. And this is huge as a business owner. I can tell you that from over 8 years of business experience, owning my own agency, now owning something slightly different with a big vision. Intuition is everything when it comes to owning a business, running a business, and performing your best day to day. So I'm really excited to have him here on the show. Welcome to the show.
Great, thank you very much. I'm hoping to deliver some good knowledge bombs when it comes to intuition. Where it comes, it seems kind of intangible in nature, but how so important it is when making any kind of business decision. It's absolutely huge.
Yes, absolutely. Totally agree, man. I'd love for us just to dive into your backstory. Like, how did you get started? How long you've been doing this? And, tell us a little bit about your business and your model and how you work.
Yeah, absolutely. So funny enough, when it comes to intuition, it really kind of the origin of this really kind of came from a business book that I wrote called Fail Fast, Succeed Faster. And the premise of that book is that if you were to learn from the failures of others, then you should be able to succeed faster. And so I had interviewed close to 300 people in it. And so when I used to go on stages to talk about this book, the number one question that entrepreneurs used to ask me was, Sunil, give me the one thing. And so I said, okay, here, look, I didn't come with a cue card or a PDF sheet. I'm like, there's a 400-page book here. So there wasn't really anything of substance. Like, there's not one thing. It's massive. Until I went back to the audio recordings. And when I went back to the audio recordings, 80 to 90% of those entrepreneurs or business executives used some form of, either they directly said, I should have trusted my intuition, or ignored my intuition, or ignored my gut, or they knew what the right decisions were, but they didn't make that right decision. There was some form of this thing called intuition that they ignored, that they got them to really kind of get into the failures. And so I really kind of thought about, okay, well, that's really interesting. So, when has intuition kind of hit me? And so I distinctly remember, this is where the seeds of my entrepreneurship, I believe, came from. When I was 5 years old, my father, I told my father I wanted to buy these video games, and he was saying they're too expensive. And I distinctly remember this voice telling me, Sunil, go door to door to raise money. And that's exactly what I did. I had my two and a half year old brother with me in diapers with me, and we went door to door, and I raised $200, and $100 went to my dad, and the other $100 went to charity, because that was what my school was doing. And so it was just, I was the entrepreneur. It was so ingrained in me from that moment. But the problem is that, if people are watching, I mean, I'm a South Asian male. And so there's really kind of 4 career doors that you kind of go into as a South Asian male. It's doctor, lawyer, engineer, or failure. And my intuition was really strong in telling me to be that entrepreneur. I mean, all these breadcrumbs that I had was all screaming of entrepreneurship, but I ignored it and I drank the East Indian Kool-Aid and I got into engineering and I absolutely hated it. And then in year 2 of that, I got a chance to become a part-time investor in a Mexican restaurant chain that came up to Canada. And pretty soon I was making 5 times more in dividends as a private investor than I was as an engineer. And so finally, I just listened to my intuition in year 3. I dropped engineering and I became an entrepreneur. And 6 businesses later, $20 million in revenues, it was definitely the right choice to make. And it was really, really interesting that if I look back at all the times that because these businesses that weren't one thing, there was a wholesale clothing, there was pop-up events, entertainment company, retail clothing. I mean, they're all very, very different. And each single time it was really about trusting my intuition to develop solid relationships and build those relationships based on trust that allowed me for those businesses to be successful. And then I soon morphed into a management consultant. And from there, I had a huge contract down in Silicon Valley. It was massive. Yet the contract terms kept changing. And so I really need to say, but this, again, something was saying, back away, don't take the contract. And I ignored it. And I went down to Silicon Valley and the company never paid me. And I came back to Canada with 25 cents in my bank account. I was just dead broke. The one that you were alluding to in my description, which was the most devastating, when I was in engineering, doing courses at university, I had a friend of mine who was being stalked at the time. And she said, Sunil, I need some help. Can you give me some advice? And again, something was telling me to meet with her that afternoon, yet I ignored it and said, let's meet a couple of days later. And the very next day, that same guy who was stalking her walked up to her in a bus shelter and put a bullet through her head and killed her instantly. And so now I really needed to take a deep dive into this thing called intuition. I really struggled with the definition because at that time, if I looked online, it was talking about, voices from God and manifestation, all that stuff. And so for those who believe that's what intuition is, that's great, but it didn't resonate with me. And, coming from that sort of logical, rational, entrepreneurial perspective, I really need a little bit more teeth into that. And so I said, okay, how do I think about intuition? And there was this international psychic that talked about signals and intuition. I said, well, that kind of makes sense to me, because if I look back at that voice and all these other things that were telling me not to go into the situations that I got into, they were kind of signals for me. And so I took her interview, and the other things she definitely talked about that and quantum theory and quantum physics, and that it's a real thing, and we just have to change our belief systems, and that there was little to no research in it. And so that kind of baffled me a bit, because I'm thinking, okay, look, this thing happened to me, and I've now got business executives, close to 300 of them, talking about this thing called intuition. How come there's no research in this thing? Like, this just doesn't make sense. And so I looked in my circle to see, okay, who can I talk to that's going to give me that scientific explanation? And so lo and behold, there was this neurologist that I had as a colleague, and I said, okay, I'm going to go out to him. And so set up shop at the hospital he was in, brought my film crew, turned on the cameras, and I basically asked him, I was thinking it's going to be like a 2-minute conversation, does intuition exist? And he actually says, it absolutely exists. We all have a sixth sense. He uses it for his patients, and he says that the neurons actually in the gut are short-circuiting the main brain, where they actually are giving signals that are much quicker than we think. And he was saying more and more neuroscience research is coming out showing that intuition actually acts much earlier than we're consciously aware of it. And so I'm thinking, wow, okay, so now I've got this art and science blend. I've got this sort of the signals, and I've got the science to match it up. And I'm thinking, okay, this resonates with me. This makes sense. And so I wanted to go kind of find out where this neuroscience research was that the neurologist was talking about. So I went to an academic database and typed in the word intuition. And I'm just thinking, wow, hopefully there's going to be at least 10 articles here on intuition. And I hit the enter key. Tens of thousands of articles on intuition. And now some of the things that I was thinking about were kind of being written about. So for example, one of the things I thought about since I was 5 years old, maybe perhaps I was born with intuition. And there was this paper that showed that infants as young as 2 months old have been shown to have intuitive tendencies, or is what this paper calls intuitive physics. And then the reason why I struggled with a definition, I was thinking, how come I couldn't find a definition? One of the papers showed an MRI brain scan that when you use intuition, the part of the brain that lights up is your amygdala or the limbic system. And so that's the very, very first part. The only thing it knows is basically one word type of, and it's not even a word. It's like, okay, fight, flight, think, do, trust, that's it. And there's no capacity for language. And so what happens is that's exactly why I couldn't find a definition, is because we all define it in our own way. So if I saw it as an art and science, excellent. If you thought it was voices from God, or I had an ex-NHL coach they say that it came from the cosmos, that's how they define intuition. And it's no right or wrong, because again, there's no capacity for language. So that kind of made sense. And then this whole delay that piece of intuition happening much earlier than we're consciously thinking about. One of the pieces of two papers actually showed that when they measured intuition through brain scans, they showed that the brain lit up 7 to 10 seconds before people actually made a decision or took an action. And they did another experiment with entrepreneurs, and they measured things like skin conductance and heart rate. And when they measured intuition in entrepreneurs, they found almost the exact same thing. On average, 7 seconds before an entrepreneur actually made a decision, that's when intuition kind of hit them. So now I've got this plethora of science that's backing this stuff up. And so it just made sense to me now that the art and the science kind of blended. And so I really need to understand, okay, so we kind of know this. How does it work actually? So I interviewed over 1,000 people, and many of them are entrepreneurs and executives, to really kind of find out, okay, how does it actually work? And so when I looked at these signals, there's actually two types of signals that inform us. There's positive signals and negative signals. The positive signals are the ones that basically tell us to go ahead. And so for me, for example, the dots connect, or I feel a feeling of flow. And there's this one CEO I interviewed, and he's run 2 multi-million-dollar businesses. He's in his second one right now. And he sees an omen pop up on his behind his right shoulder. So there's no color or shape, but he just knows there's this omen that pops up. So when he's doing a business deal or talking to a vendor or hiring someone, this omen pops up. That's his positive signal that says, go ahead and just do whatever you're doing. And so I contrast that with negative signals. And the negative signals are the ones that are telling us to back away from a decision. And the characteristic of negative signals that's a little bit more unique than positive ones is that it starts actually very subtle in nature. And then as you ignore the subtle ones, these are the ones that we typically ignore, it gets louder and louder until you can't ignore it anymore. And so for me, again, I get that gut feeling. And for some reason, when I see something that's odd, my eyebrows will start to kind of cross, and I would lose my peripheral vision, and I just get super hyper focused. So for me, that's what my negative signals are. And there was one entrepreneur I was interviewing, and I was asking him about signals, and he was saying, yeah, Sunil, nobody's ever asked me that question. And I mean, Josh, it's not like you and I go for coffee and say, hey, when you want a latte, and what are your intuitive signals, right? I mean, it's just typically not a typical
Right.
conversation
No,
you have.
You're right. Yeah.
And so he says, Sunil, I actually don't know what they are, but you know what? Let's keep talking. And so as I continue to talk with him about the failures that he had in the ventures that he went into for the wrong reasons, like money, fame, ego, whatever, he kept grabbing his left earlobe. And in about 10 minutes, he just said, Sunil, I just realized what my negative signals are. So what happens is whenever he got into a bad situation, especially in business, his left earlobe used to pulsate with heat. And he distinctly remember it going into that venture, talking with his potential partner, and his left earlobe pulsating, talking with his wife about these ventures, his left earlobe pulsating with heat. So that's how unique these signals are for everybody. And one of the things that we have to be careful about when it comes to especially negative signals is that we don't make the mistake of just saying, like a lot of people talk about this gut feeling or this voice, and it seems to be common speak amongst social media. But what we have to do is we all have to spend time finding out what these individual signals are for us, and how unique it is. And I'll give you a simple example here. So let's say, Josh, you and I do our homework on what our intuitive signals are, and say you do a lot more than I do. And so let's say that we get that gut feeling that is a negative signal. And for you, it's, for sure it's signal number 1. And so whenever you get that gut feeling, you know that that's signal number one for you, which is a negative signal. So you back away from the situation that you're in. If I make the mistake of assuming that that gut feeling, which I do get, is also signal number one for me, but it's actually signal number three, what that means is when that gut feeling comes up for me, I've missed signal number one and signal number two. And if I've missed those first two signals, that means I've made two bad decisions. And so if I've made two bad decisions, it means I could either be stubbing my toe on a door, or I could be headed towards bankruptcy. I just don't know. And so this is where we kind of need to do enough work on what our intuitive signals are. And the other thing I found out is that there's actually 4 types of intuition. And the best way to characterize these 4 types of intuition and how they act is to actually take it from the lens of a non-believer. And so one of my colleagues was, now this guy was an investment banker for 20 years. And what he was saying is that I don't get intuition. Like for him, he was saying, like, you know, when you hear of like voices from God and things like that, he just doesn't get it, right? And so he says, I don't know what we're going to talk about, Sunil, because intuition just doesn't exist. So I said, you know, listen, let me come down and let's talk about it. And I didn't know what we were going to talk about, frankly, but I said, let me take a stab at it. So we set up the camera and I turned on the camera. And so he was saying that, yeah, Sunil, like, you know, voices from God, that stuff, it's not what intuition, like, it just doesn't figure into intuition. And then I was trying to convince him about the CEO that sees these omens. And he says, yeah, you know what? I'd like to actually shake that guy's hands. Like, but listen, when it comes to making decisions in life, it's all about, and especially in business, it's about learning. It's about data. It's about experience. And so, but John, and now we're going to start getting to the 4 types of intuition. One of the 4 types of intuition is called experiential intuition. And so if you recall me telling that we were all kind of born with intuition, if you look at your brain like an iceberg, 90%, which is the subconscious area of the brain, which is underwater, and the 10% is the conscious part, which is above water. What happens is after you're born, every single piece of learning and experience, both good and bad, formal and informal, yours and others, every single day get put into the subconscious area of brain like a library, so that when you're about to make a business decision, any business decision, what happens is your intuition goes into the subconscious, plucks the experience that you need, or the learning or the data, to inform you in a split second for you to give it a positive or negative signal. And so if it's a positive signal, that means that somewhere, somehow in your past, you've had the raw skills or experience, or you've seen projects where that decision was a positive one. And obviously, if it's a negative signal, then that means somewhere in the past, you've done something where the outcome was not a good one. And so your intuition is saying, this is not a good decision because history is going to repeat itself. And so one of the things I told John was that, his name's John Rothschild, was that sometimes intuition goes against the data. And he goes, well, that's kind of funny, Sunil. I have a story for you about that. And I said, well, please tell me. And so John was in the business of putting in franchise locations. And so what his team would look at would, on a scale of 1 to 10, if it was a 9 out of 10, they would put a franchise location in, like a Burger King, McDonald's, what have you. And they would look at things like traffic patterns, demographics, and development in that area as examples. There was this one area in a dilapidated area of Toronto that was basically, his team said, was about a 5.5 out of 10. And so him and his partner went to go see this location. And now we're going to talk about number 2 of 4, called situational intuition. So him and his partner just scan this area and they just say, I don't know, and now John's saying, perhaps this is intuition, but I think we need to put, he was saying to himself, I think there's something telling us to put it into a location here. And so as John is recounting that story to me, he's saying, perhaps it's intuition, I'm not sure, but now he's kind of getting it. And so he says he went against the team's advice. He put a franchise location there, and it was something called the Beer Market, which was the best franchise or operations or portfolio products under all of them, based on, again, situational intuition. And then at some point, John's purpose changed. He wanted to go from an investment banker to now actually owning a business. And so now we're going to get into the third of the four, called relational intuition. And what relational intuition does is it takes the people that are around you and it filters it filters your relationships to only allow those on the inside that really care for where you're going to go, what your purpose is. They're not yes people, but they will give you constructive criticism and they'll be there for the ups and the downs. And so when his purpose changed, where he wanted to run a business, all those people concerned with money, fame, ego, security, high-end restaurants, private jets, limousines, all of them told John he was nuts. Yet not one of them asked him, why are you making that decision? Except his wife. And he looks at his wife and he says to her, and now he's fully saying, this just feels right. That's an intuitive signal. So now John is getting it. And so the fourth of the four is called creative intuition. Creative intuition is the one that actually makes the decision for you. So if you're making a sandwich, for example, or turning left at the lights, that's not very creative, right? So your creative intuition is a little bit low. But if you're going to make a decision that's so obtuse in nature, then your creative intuition is pretty high. And so in this case, you would think that with 20 years of investment banking experience, John would pick a business that has healthy cash flows, strong revenues, and pretty good balance sheet. His intuition picks a tiny, bankrupt little restaurant. And so he quits he's probably making $3 to $4 million a year as an investment banker, starts from ground zero, and walks into that tiny, bankrupt little restaurant. That restaurant ended up being Eastside Mario's location #1. And he grew that to over 1,000 locations in 20 years, $2 billion in revenues, all because it felt right. And now John gets it. And so when it comes to intuition, especially from the business perspective, this is where it's like, remember, this is your experiences, your signals. This is your subconscious phenomenon. This has everything to do with you, how you define it. So all I'm doing is I'm saying, this shines a light. I'm just shining a light on this thing called intuition. And where intuition really becomes huge when it comes to business success is not necessarily just using it for your business decisions, which you absolutely need. But research shows that when it comes to business, to establish trust, it only takes 14 seconds to do that from an intuitive perspective. So you have 14 seconds to be the brand of choice. You have 14 seconds to make sure your marketing message really resonates with your customers. You have 14 seconds to really trust someone that you have in your employee. And it's those 14 seconds, and your intuition's always on, it's like a camera, right? So when you have executives that don't walk the talk, that have core values that are just something on a wall that nobody can really get behind, when you've got marketing messaging that's delivering one thing, but then you're saying one thing, you're delivering another, any of these inconsistencies that either an employee sees or a customer sees or a vendor sees, or frankly, anybody else on your management team, within 14 seconds, then that company or that management goes from what I call 3D to 2D, where you're now a statistic. And when you are a statistic as a company, to me as a vendor or as an employee or a customer, I'm going to take my business somewhere else. I'm going to go work somewhere else, or I'm going to deal with somebody else. And so that's the power of intuition. And so what companies have to do, especially from a marketing perspective or the way they treat people inside their organizations, is to make sure they do things where they allow people to be creative. They allow people to fail, and this is not huggy empathy stuff, right? You have to have empathy, but you allow them to have that trust. You trust them. You're not treating them like a number. And when you have that, people want to work for you. People are a lot more productive. And if you want to look at stats, for those employees who trust the management, they're 31% more productive. And that also translates into a 37% increase in the bottom line. For customers who love a company brand, they're 54% more likely to buy again. 76% more likely to buy a third time. And they're telling other people. And so now you have other people that are going to be the brand of choice. And so if you do it right from something they call intuitive branding, which is what I help implement into companies, then that's how you crush the competition, because all the employees are coming to you, all the customers are coming to you, and they're leaving all the other companies. And if you do it wrong, employees are leaving, which means high turnover costs. Your customers are looking elsewhere. And when customers are looking elsewhere, it's not just the cost of wooing them back with your marketing message. It's also the cost of you wooing them back out of the company they're already buying. So your marketing costs are 2, if not more times, just to bring that customer back. And then who knows how many other people they've told. And if you look at stats, again, it's 6 times cheaper to market to a recurring customer, an existing customer, if you do it right, than grabbing a new customer. And so if you look at all these different costs that are happening, if you do it wrong, the stats, if you want to go by, companies losing $1 billion a year. And that's just what's reported. I'm pretty sure it's a lot more than that.
Yeah. Wow. That's crazy. I had so many different things happening in my head as I was listening to you. Because for one, this is going back to the beginning of your origin story. Like I can actually resonate with that quite a bit, because my first entrepreneur seed was when I was a child. I was probably 8 or 9, 10, and Nintendo was really big at the time, the original Nintendo.
Yep.
And my parents, for whatever reason, they didn't buy me a Nintendo. I think it was a question of money, to be quite honest. And so what I did was I actually borrowed Nintendo games from others and then rented them out to others. I was like the middleman, basically.
Awesome.
So I resonated with that story quite a bit, just because that to me was also video games in my youth was something that gave me my first entrepreneur seed as well.
Right.
But and another thing that I was thinking about too, and this is much more relevant to the topic here, is I was thinking about what you said, and just digesting it and thinking back to all the different decisions, personally and professionally, that popped up in my head as you're going over the 4 types of intuition. And I'm thinking to myself, the reason why a lot of the things have worked out in business when I've made, calculated risk decisions, like investing in a mastermind, investing in a group, investing in a certification, et cetera, was because I followed my intuition.
Right.
If I would have not followed my intuition, I would have cost myself a lot of money, a lot of opportunity, and much more than that even. But I followed my intuition. That's why things like that worked out. Personally, too, I could also resonate with that as well, because there was, for example, there was a recent period of time where I was seeing someone, and my intuition was like all over the place. My intuition was like not telling me that this was like a good fit. Like there was something funny going on here. And turned out that, that was the case. And, I moved on and she moved on as well. But yeah, it's just funny because how intuition does play such a big role in, just you making the best possible decisions personally or professionally. So I completely resonate, with everything you just went over. How can someone watching or listening to this, how can they find out more, read your book, maybe even learn from you? Sounds like you have a great program. I'd love for you to maybe just review it if you have a little time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this way people know like what intuition branding really is all about and what that program entails.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of things on the intuitionology.com website. So there's a 7-day challenge. And so and intuition doesn't know the difference between personal and professional. Remember, it's hitting the amygdala. So any decision you make, either personal or professional, it doesn't matter. What you have to do is figure out, are the signals unique to a business perspective versus a personal perspective? And that's what you have to look at. And so from that perspective, what I have is in the 7-day challenge, and you get a free copy of my ebook Gut anyways in the 7-day challenge. And what happens is you solve a problem, and then I take you through a very specific process with that. So you solve a problem that hasn't worked out. And what you do is, because it didn't work out, you list the steps of what you tried in the past, and that informs what your negative signals are. So you take a list of what your negative signals are. And then what you do is, and that's important to do first, because when you go to plan your positive, what you should be doing, what happens is if you try and force something in there that you shouldn't be doing, yet you emotionally are trying to get it in there, your negative signal is going to pop up, because now you've recognized what that is. Say, Sunil, come on now. You're trying to force that in there. And so what you're left with then, based on positive signals, is, again, the steps that you need to take. And then what you have to do is, okay, who is going to help you with those steps? And once again, you got to figure out, is that a mentor? Is that your best friend? Is it a colleague? Who is that person? And once again, you can't force, maybe your best friend in there because you're doing a sexy 7-day challenge and you feel good, you get that ego stroke. Your negative signal is going to say, Sunil, come on now. That person does not have the experience to help you solve this problem. And so what you're then left with is a person or a group of people that'll help you solve that problem. And then an environment that you change, and you simply take action. And in that actual 7-day challenge, I've got 2 people who go through each of the tasks with you. One guy actually sold his house in the 7 days. He started with a negative 20,000. Real estate person came in and threw her card at him saying, you can only get 20,000 under asking. I'm telling you, I know the market. But his intuition was saying, I don't trust her. Before, he would have been a pushover. He would have said, yeah, well, I believe you. And he would have sold. He was signed the contract. But in the 7 days, what he ended up having was he had a bidding war, and he sold his house for $50,000 over asking price. And that's great, 10 grand a day. 10 grand a day. And the other person who goes through this is someone by the name of Ashley Michelle. She was a witness to a homicide. Not only was she a witness to a homicide, she actually walked into the apartment after her boyfriend had murdered one of their friends in a bathtub. He locks the door behind her and puts a knife to her back and said, I'm already going away for 1 murder. Might as well make it 2. And he said, you're next. Her intuition, specifically her relational intuition, had to really kind of monitor him. She had to calm down, make sure she didn't get emotional or she'd die. And he ended up choking her, assaulting her, asking her to clean up the blood. And then her intuition was just waiting and waiting and waiting. And finally, there was a moment that he was not looking and he was walking in the other direction. And her intuition said, now. And she ran and opened the door. And obviously she lived. She called 911. So she used the 7-day challenge to kind of minimize the PTSD, depression, anxiety. And that's something that you just can't, it won't get rid of it, my 7-day challenge, but it minimized it. And so she learned that she can go back to the gym. That's where she felt really good. And that she learned to start trusting people. So the way I say it is, if people like John Harris and Ashley Michelle can go through the 7-day problem to solve those kind of problems, you can solve any kind of problem. And so that's on the personal side, or you can use a business problem in that. And then with that, you now get a worksheet that's fillable for the rest of your life. You can just completely, just start another problem. On the intuitive branding side, just give me a call, and what we can do is take a look at what you need in terms of coaching for having that in. So do you want to look at sales or marketing? I'm currently in the works of looking at some kind of a boot camp. And so my marketing team is looking at, we had a lot of inquiries from entrepreneurs specifically to do either a group coaching session or just to have one-on-one sessions for an hour. And so again, with the flurry of all that, you need to be organized to figure out, okay, what are we going to do versus some of the bigger corporates that I'm working for that hire me for a month to 2 months in terms of coaching.
Okay. Wow. You saw my face, right? When you were telling me the story about one of your clients. That's just nuts, but I'm so glad that nothing happened to her.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's definitely unfortunate that she went through that. But wow, amazing stuff. Well, guys, definitely follow Sunil and, get sharper at intuition through his teachings, whether it's just getting a copy of his book, going through his challenge, or hiring him. Either way, this can be super impactful for you, both as a person and also as a business owner. I highly recommend it. That's why I brought him on to the show, because I really felt like it could be super impactful on a very high level when it comes to your success in e-commerce. It is called the e-commerce performance show for a reason. So definitely, follow Sunil. Sunil, thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate it. Guys, you need to share this episode. I mean, there's some powerful stuff that Sunil went over that can really make a big impact on a very large amount of people. Just about everybody out there can use this episode. So definitely, share it with your friends, your family. This way they can hear it, because this is a powerful episode. Thank you, Sunil, for being on the show. I appreciate it, man.
Thank you very much. This was great.
Thank you for tuning into the e-commerce performance marketing show. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, like, and comment with a timestamp of your favorite part and share it with a friend. Until our next episode, here's to you and the success of your e-commerce business.